Today, we're going to introduce the basic aspects again of budgeting and how budgeting supports progress towards reaching desired lifestyle today and long-term financial goals. Paul is a CFP in our office, and he's going to actually kick us off at the beginning here. I think last time I introduced Paul with, you are a self-proclaimed boglehead, and I'll let you explain what that is.
Yeah, so as Jonathan mentioned, I'm Paul. I'm a certified financial planner. So I've been in mindful money now for about a year, and I've been in industry for about 7 years. I am a boglehead. What that means is John Bogle, who's the head of Vanguard, passed away not too long ago. There was a cult following of him in the ways in which he wanted to reduce expenses, have exposure to the markets, and be a long-term investor, kind of similar to how we are in mindful money. So with that, there's a lot of ways in which they want to be efficient with their finances. And there's a movement called the FIRE movement, which is financial independence, retire early. And so things have branched off of that. But I have a passion for financial literacy and for making your finances as efficient as possible so that you can live the life you want to lead. So here's what we're going to be covering today. It's anything and everything that has to do with budgeting. So in other words, identifying your expenses in order to save towards goals. The first topic we're going to get into is budgeting fundamentals and overview. So when you create a budget or a spending plan, you might hear a spending plan because budget has a negative connotation. A lot of people aren't aware and kind of just wing it. But by paying attention and creating a budget, you gain control, you become aware, which allows you to save, and then you can make adjustments to save more. So here's the actual definition of a budget. It's looking at cash inflows or income and allocating it to outflows such as expenses, savings, and debt payments.
So that's kind of why you budget, and we're gonna dig into the how and some definitions of budgeting. So there's sort of three main budget components, right? There's income. This is everything that comes in, right? That's what income, everything that comes in: salary, interest, dividends, rent from real estate, spousal support, Social Security, pensions. This is all income. Then you've got expenses is everything that goes out, which could be rent or mortgage, your food, car expenses, insurance, clothes, cell phone, taxes, all of these sorts of things. And then a lot of folks sort of treat savings as what's left over. And you're gonna see throughout this conversation today that we're actually gonna suggest that you pay yourself first, and as sort of a down payment on savings. And then if there's something left over after expenses, you save that leftover as well. And that way you get a little bit closer to those things that are most important to you. So there's a lot of folks here. I'm going to ask a question to get us kicked off. When you think of budget, if somebody says the word budget, what does that mean to you? What does a budget mean to you? If anyone has like a gut reaction, pop it into the chat. I'll give you a second to catch up here. Yeah.
I deal with this issue at my church because I'm the stewardship chair. So a budget is a plan. That's all it is.
I see that's and sometimes we look at it as a plan, we replace it with spending plan. I noticed in the chat some people said limitations, restrictions, and of course Michelle always gives us some humor, squinty face. Right? No one likes to talk about budgeting. Many people hear this word budget, right, and they think it is that limit and restrictions. No, it's really a way just to make sure that you're considering all of our goals, the ones that are happening right now, as well as the ones that are long far into the future. And that keeps us from making decisions just all about what's in front of us. The way you budget, starts with a blank spreadsheet, a piece of paper, and a stack of receipts, because you're trying to figure out how much you actually spend. And by tracking your expenses, you can begin to categorize and prioritize. And your budget should actually allow you to spend on things that are the most important to you, not just needs, but also some things that are wants, some things that move you closer to meaning and joy. As an aside, it's not doing this with a partner is sometimes the most difficult thing in the world, right? So we have a lot of battles in relationships around money because different people have different priorities. And so when you do this with your partner, you got to make sure you sit down and give each other space that meaning and joy gets to both of you, not just one of you. Remember, budgeting isn't about cutting spending. That's right. It's a keeping the big picture in mind. So when you think about current lifestyle expenses, you're also thinking about the future expenses. And here's a few subcategories, right? You want to think about things that create meaning and joy. Then there's things that you want, but you can put off until a little bit later. And then there's things that might be nice, but you can totally live without. Now, the first category is something, there's needs. And then there's this other category, meaning and joy, that we want to actually pay some attention to and allow some of those things to come through, as many as we can. But the 2 and 3, those categories are things we often want to trade away for the needs and the things that bring money and joy later in life. So we can continue with those things.
So with budgeting, remember your priorities, that you can always make adjustments, that it takes time for changes in habits to come to fruition, to persevere and not give up, and to look into technology to make things easier and more efficient. For example, I myself use Mint and also a spreadsheet to keep track of my expenses and budget on a month-to-month basis, or even a day-to-day with my Mint, but then my spreadsheet on a month-to-month basis. And then there's another popular app called YNAB, which stands for You Need a Budget. So those are some useful tools that you can use out there to help automate these things. As mentioned earlier, most people wing it when it comes to budgeting. Has anyone fallen into this camp of just winging it in the past? So as you can see here, there are a few examples of the pitfalls for not having a budget. Without a budget, as you likely know if you have wung it before, some people get lucky and then many others run into issues. But why leave it up to hope or chance when you can take control of your financial future? So some key takeaways from budgeting. 1, a big reason for budgeting is so that you can save. 2, by becoming aware of your money, you will be in a better position to save and have more money. 3, getting your budget correct takes a lot of hard work. And 4, use your budget to help inform your decisions.
So I just want to point out, someone said something in the chat here that I thought was really interesting. They said, I used to always wing it, and now it was now my spouse does it, and now we're pretty much dialed in. I got to say, I don't know how, it's not a percentage of people, but many couples work that way. I know that my parents worked that way. My dad he would wing it, like, we have money, right? My mom was like always to the letter, always. Like, we have $7, that's what we're going to spend it on. She was always really tight that way. Grateful for that, not pejorative. So the foundation of personal finance is savings. And the way you align your savings and your future contentment and happiness is by understanding your savings goals and what matters to you. Now, I talk about personal finance with a lot of people. I see unhappiness come from 2 primary sources. First, there's people that simply, they're young, starting out, or they're recovering from illness or something like that. And they're just trying to find an opportunity to save. They don't have enough income, and that's probably where they should spend most of their time, is trying to build that income stream up. Then there's those who have a lot of money, who save plenty, and probably more than's even necessary, but they haven't ever aligned their values and their savings and their money. So they're sort of, it's not just shooting from the hip. It's sort of, they're following a preordained path. And they usually have to do some real serious reflection to make sure that they're on the right path for them. And maybe they should do something different altogether. Or maybe they just simply forgot what brought them joy and they need to do some work in that area. And so it's really interesting to see both people build an income and start saving, and people who are saving figure out how some planning and some understanding of their own personal values and goals can help them get closer to something resembling meaning and joy in their lives. Saving money early builds a foundation for future wealth while you enjoy your short-term lifestyle goals. Your budget should allow you to partake in things that you make you happy right now while you're investing for the dreams and the long-term stuff. There are 3 main components of a savings plan that kind of put this into perspective. You're going to have some money in an emergency fund just in case stuff goes on, something happens. You're going to have some money you put into short-term savings, and you're going to have long-term savings. And I think Paul's going to dig pretty deep into the emergency fund calculus right here.
That's right. So an emergency fund is just that. It's an amount of money you keep in case of an emergency, such as a hospital bill or a car accident. It's also useful to have this fund when the investments that you have go down so that when you do need funds, you don't sell when the market's at a low. You should have roughly about 6 months of expenses in cash in a savings account, unless you're in a more volatile situation, such as a competitive industry, and then you should consider having more. Or also if you're just risk averse and you just feel more comfortable with more cash. But you can also go down as low as 3 months, but we wouldn't go lower than that.
I love what you said there, Paul. The idea that if you are risk averse, you can always have a bigger emergency fund, and that is a great tool to help you survive market downturns and just the rough seas of personal finance.
Yeah. So in order to determine your emergency fund, you take your monthly financial expenses and multiply it by, if we're going to use 6 months, by 6. So let's say your expenses on a monthly basis are $5,000. 5,000 times 6, $30,000 in savings. That's what you should keep in your emergency fund at all times. Now, if you dipped into your emergency fund before, do you mind sharing what you did that for? I'm curious if people have had emergency fund, if they've had an emergency fund, what they used it for. Because these things come up, and I've had to use it as well. New hot water here, yeah. I think I did too, actually. Car brake sound, yeah. Unemployment, yep. Wow, so yeah, there's quite an array of reasons why you'd use an emergency fund. Thanks for sharing, everybody, and feel free to share some more as I continue talking. So on top of those, you can see here on this list that there are some other examples, but it's just important for you to know that your emergency fund should not be used for regular expenses. They should be used by income. So if you happen to use an emergency fund at any given point, once things stabilize over time, you will want to determine how to replenish that fund so that you can have it for the next potential emergency. So getting more specific, here are some examples when you should or should not use your emergency fund. So for emergencies, this includes, and some of you have already mentioned it, medical insurance deductibles, critical home and vehicle repairs, family emergencies, and medical emergencies. And this is not the whole list, this is just some things. The deciding factor, though, is this in determining if it's an emergency used for emergency fund or not, is this expense an emergency or something you plan for in your budget? If you happen to be spending on a plannable expense with your emergency fund, then that's a signal that you are spending more than you're making. And that means you need to start making some adjustments to your budget.
Good. Short-term savings helps us fit today's bigger ticket items into the budget. So it supports the lifestyle you want today without using the thing called debt. Now, if a good example of this is if you want to plan ahead for a $4,000 summer trip sometime in 2021, and you've got 10 months between now and the trip, that's $400 a month that you need to put away, from your checking account, from the paycheck into the savings account. You can automate that pretty easily, of course. And this is where you got to sort of catch yourself. That means probably the concert tickets are out, or maybe the TV that you're going to buy is out. It's just you're focusing on the thing that you have planned for, and you're actually planning and completing a plan for that thing. The most important element of short-term savings is it helps us avoid the worst kinds of debt, consumer debt, credit card debt, and those kinds of things. If you've ever purchased a television on credit from Best Buy, you know it comes with about a 20% interest rate. This makes the TV itself cost twice as much as it should. So long-term savings or investing accounts lay the foundation for long-term financial plans. And that's what we talk about all the time. The universal long-term savings issue, the thing that we all have to face, is retirement. Now, I'm going to ask that somebody in chat put into there some other things that are some of their long-term planning goals. If you want to share a different non-retirement long-term planning goal, pop it in the chat. Yeah, me too. Paul, mine's not that long-term anymore. 3 years away.
I can be a little bit more aggressive with my investments. Commercial real estate.
Yeah, these are great ideas. I think the one that comes up the most, kids or grandkids college. That's the one that comes up the most in these kinds of conversations. But also buying a house that gets to be really big, commercial real estate, that's big. So this is where you need the habit of paying yourself first. In other words, before you buy the new shoes or take the trip or go out for the nice dinner, you got to make sure that you're hitting that monthly long-term savings amount and setting that aside. usually go for rules of thumb. You know me, I'm always talking down about rules of thumb, but this is one instance where I say a rule of thumb makes a lot of sense. Most people don't do the math about their financial planning. And if you're not going to do the math about your financial planning, then make 10% your minimum set aside. If you make 10% your minimum set aside, that will control your spending today, and it will put enough away so that you'll have enough later. If you can't do 10, then do 5, and then look at it every 3 months and try to up it a percent as you get used to it, as you get more income. It's just a way to make sure you're taking care of that long term.
And Jonathan, one quick comment, and sorry to interrupt, is that if you have an employer plan and the employer is matching, if you do 3% and they match up to that same amount, that's 6% that you're only paying 3% in, and you're halfway there.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. I love it. I love it when an employer matches. It's actually, that's one of the things that kind of went away this during COVID, but I think most of it's going to be coming back in time. So when I was a kid, my parents forced me to save 50% of everything I made into my college fund. So I, of course, forced my kids to do the same thing. When I was in college, though, my dad said, Jonathan, when you graduate, put 10% away. And so I wasn't, I'm not 100%. I didn't do this perfectly, but I did start putting money away, right after college, and I had to take it out to pay some things, some debts and some other things. So I've done those kinds of things. But every advisor ever is going to tell you that 10% is a minimum spot. Highly recommend starting there. And then if you're starting later in life, that may need to be 15 or 20. This is why I really hope people do that math.
All right. We had a good question. I just want to address it real quick in the chat. It says, what about saving for an emergency fund? So we're talking about saving for retirement or other things. So for an emergency fund, the way you want to think about it is, any excess income you have over outflows, you're going to want to put towards the emergency fund right away. So let's say you earn $5,000 a month, and you spend $4,000 a month, and you need, 4 times 6 is 24,000. It's going to take you 24 months to build that emergency fund because you have that $1,000 gap. So if you, because that's the excess cash flow you'd be having. So it's the $1,000 difference is what would go towards the emergency fund until you build it up to where it needs to be. The idea is that you want to increase income and decrease expenses, so that time frame that it takes to build your emergency fund is shorter. Does that make sense? I know it's hard to describe this without putting numbers to it on the chat, but I just want to address that question. Anything else you would want to add, Jonathan?
Yeah, there's a lot of, so the question, I think part of the question is always, I have a limited amount I can save. What should I focus on first? Now, I think the order of operations goes something like this. If you have an employer sponsored plan and they match,
you do that.
You save that first, because that's, if you put in 2 and they put in 2, you've just made 100%. So you want to do that. After that, you want to make sure you have an emergency fund. After that, you want to pay off your high yield debt. After that, you want to actually do the rest of your 401k maybe, but it gets to be a little bit more murky in terms of what's the thing. Do you pay off all the other debt? Do you pay off, invest more in a 401k? Do you invest in a taxable account? It gets very specific after, very vague after that, specific to each individual. But I think the idea of get your employer match first, then build your emergency fund, then do other stuff. I think those are the first 2 things that you want to do.
And just to clarify, high yield means anything above like credit card debt is what you're saying.
I would probably make.
And sometimes student loans too, right?
Yep.
Depending on the rates. Okay.
Yep.
Great. Before you set up your savings plan, you should consider some risk factors such as unemployment, caring for a family, and the amount of debt you have. You do not want to be in a situation where you save to retirement account and now need to dip into your emergency fund to pay for these risk factor expenses. So that's kind of what we're talking about, except in the one exception of getting the employer match. With an individualized savings plan, you have 3 buckets: your emergency fund, your short-term savings, and your long-term savings. After having about 6 months of expenses in cash, you will want to save towards short-term goals, or goals that you want to have accomplished within the next 3 to 5 years. It is important to distinguish this from long-term savings or goals greater than 5 years. The reason is because how you invest that money is going to be different, because you're going to go more aggressive with the long-term than you would with the short-term goals. So our next section we're going to be covering is about prioritizing expenses and the opportunity costs involved. Jonathan will get into this next.
So, I mean, this may go without saying. Needs are the basics of life: food, shelter, utilities, basic clothes, gas to get you to work. Wants are basically everything else, like to haves, nice to haves, things you'd enjoy but that aren't necessary for survival. The latest iPhone, more expensive clothes, vacation, nicer car, bigger house, bigger yard, those kinds of things. Most people can tell the difference in kind of a cerebral way when we are talking about wants and needs in a class setting, but there are many forces aligned towards pushing us towards purchasing more of everything. And those forces are here, right? Advertising. I'm curious if there's any people in the audience here who have marketing degrees or who have studied A/B testing, and just say yes, or you can maybe provide a definition of A/B testing in the chat. My understanding of A/B testing is things like this. You know, marketing people say we're going to put an ad up, and we're going to put one ad up that's got a pink background and another ad up that's got a blue background. And we're going to tell, based on the number of people that click through and purchase, what's better, pink or blue. And then once we know that blue or pink is better, let's say pink is better. Once we know that pink is better, then we're going to try that same ad with like a piano background versus happy sounding music background versus maybe a sad or a somber sounding music background. And then we're going to figure out from that, is it pink and sad that's the thing that's the highest selling, or is it pink and a happy sounding thing that's the highest selling? So companies are spending billions of dollars figuring out how to manipulate your neurons so you buy their crap. That's working against you, right? Another thing that's working against you is peers. I've got two kids, 15 and 12. So I'm right in the thick of peer influence, but I'm not going to put it on them. So I remember 19 years ago, I was 30 years old. I was going to propose to my wife, Kate, and I didn't know how much to spend on a ring. So what did I do? I asked my friends, and my friends said, and I Googled this actually before this presentation because, I wanted to see if it was still the case. Still the case. Google says yes. 2 months salary minimum. Now, as a kid from South Dakota, I thought that was ridiculous, but they told me that if I didn't, that I'd be a laughing stock. She'd say no, I'd be a social joke, she'd never forgive it, all these kinds of things. So, I spent 2 months of my salary on a ring to convince my wife that she should marry me. She said yes, so evidently it worked. There's a proof that it worked. But that's peer pressure, right? That's what that is. And then, do any of you have, money experiences from when you were children that carry over to adulthood, or that maybe that you've rebelled against? You've done the opposite of what you were trained to do. If so, I'd love to hear. These are the best stories. I'd love to hear if you have a story like that. I'd love to hear that in the chat. I'll tell you a story while you're writing, because someone maybe someone's embarrassed. So I remember comparison shopping for jeans. I didn't get Levi's when I was a kid. I got store brand, Sears. What are they called? They were called Roughnecks or something like that. Sears brand jeans. And then my mom would patch them for my brother and I when we tore through the knee. And we'd go to like Sears and Penny's and Woolworths, and then we would find where the cheapest was. And it was always like the first place we went was the cheapest. We had to go all the way back there. So buying a pair of jeans always took like 10 hours. Such a painful process. And I can't do that anymore. Like I have a visceral reaction to that. And by the way, now it's so easy to price shop.
So when it comes to spending, people tend to spend beyond their means, or more than they have, within their means or beneath their means. So as you can see, spending beneath your means allows for the most savings potential, but as you can tell, we've all had variety of experiences, and that's okay. If you feel comfortable, please share in the chat also. So Jonathan talked about like a childhood thing, but I want to know the first time you were aware of when you felt the pressure to buy a good or service, specifically that. Well, candy, that's right on par with me, Catherine. So I was going to tell my story, which was buying candy after school. I would see posters up during the week for Candy Friday, and then the other kids would brag about what they all got. And I wanted to have the most and best candy to make the other kids jealous. So there's very much a competitive thing that I wasn't even aware of, that consumerism was playing a part on me. So like my experience in some of yours, I'm sure you were exposed to the idea of consumerism early on. You see commercials and advertisements everywhere. It's very subliminal, and you're influenced by your friends, or you're influenced by family or other personal experiences from a young age. And the way our mindset and behaviors develop are not as conscious as we like to think, because we're just thrown into this world, and we're just inundated with all this information and we act on it.
So you see that when we split this up, I took a lot of the wants versus needs stuff. So I talk about wants and needs a lot because in our culture, I think we've kind of lost the difference. Needs are actually pretty minimal. We take our relative wealth for granted, and unless you've been poor, I mean really poor, you really have no idea what Thomas Hobbes, people know who that is, Thomas Hobbes, meant when he said that mankind's natural state was there was no place for industry, there was no knowledge of the face of the earth, no account of time, no arts, no letters. And he said the life of man was, and he meant man and women, the life of men and women was solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. This is in mankind's natural state. So the closer you've been to poverty, the more this makes sense to you, the clearer need is relative to want. I always debate whether I share these things. When I was 3 years old, my dad quit his job at the power company, Black Hills Power and Light in Rapid City, South Dakota. And he and some partners went into business. This was 1974 up in Montana. And the business literally crashed before it launched. And my family didn't have an income again until the late 80s. So this is like the formative years of my life, from when I was 3 till the middle of my high school career. And what I knew was that I wanted. We had a roof, we had water, we had coupons, and we had help from family for food, and we clean clothes that usually fit. Cars were not reliable. There was no savings for many years. So our needs were barely met. Everything we had was used and basically on its last legs. My mom would splurge occasionally. I remember there was an ice cream store called Fjords, and that would be the biggest deal, was to get this big ice cream cone from Fjords. But they didn't have an income until I was a junior, senior in high school. And that's when my dad started as an engineer at Ellsworth Air Force Base. And the 4 words that came out of my mom's mouth pretty much my entire life was, we can't afford that, because we had limited resources, and her priorities were in line. She did what she had to do. And I don't share this actually to impress anybody. In fact, there's a mix of emotions and embarrassment and shame and stuff that comes up, when you talk about this kind of stuff. And then you flow over to today, and there's a bunch of guilt that comes along with where I am today. I hated this growing up. But in our modern world, we've actually conflated wants and needs. No one chooses to go here, but if we have to, we can always do with less. We are so blessed, and we are so lucky. It's really good to have some context for some of this kind of stuff. So, and today, there's people that are really, there's like an enormous number of people that are really suffering today, that have no income and will probably have no income for many months. And so we need to take our suffering with, I think, a big grain of salt. So financial planning is really a lifetime resource management game. In my parents' instance, they couldn't start saving until they were in their late 40s. And they still got it done and are retired today, because when they started, they got really serious. Now, I say that because I see a lot of stress about money everywhere I look. And there are 3 things that are really important to understand about the stress. First, it doesn't help. Stress doesn't create better outcomes. It just creates heart problems. And that's the second thing. It hurts us. It hurts our health. It hurts our relationships. It actually hurts our financial outcomes. And third, it's unnecessary. It's a long road. Who we're going to be tomorrow, we're becoming right now. We don't have to be there right now. If you can't save 10%, save 5. If you can't save 5, save 2. If you can't save 2, save 1, and then get better. And slowly, incrementally, you can get better. The beauty of sort of values-based financial planning is that you focus your resources on meaningful things both now and later. And that's how you get to this place where you get happy and joy. For me, I took my dad's advice, and I've been saving as much as I can from day one. One of the keys is to find a way to reduce expenses. And Paul, you want to give us some ideas about how we can do that?
Yeah, and I just want to say too, Jonathan, like what you're saying, like, we have these things we're aiming for, and we necessarily can't get there, but just the first step of not, we're joking about winging it, but like what we're talking about is like just getting out of denial. You know, and the reason we're in denial is because it's a scary thing, and when you face it and get over that fear, that's the first step of really taking action on what you want to accomplish with your money, and that's really important. And it's a hard thing to do. So as Jonathan said, that's the incremental change you can make. So the three types of expenses we have are fixed, periodic, and variable. So fixed is like your rent. You pay the same amount each month. Periodic payments may be your car insurance. You may pay every 3 to 6 months. Then there are variable expenses like your PG&E bill. These expenses are on a regular cycle, but they fluctuate depending upon how much you use the service. As mentioned, fixed expenses are the same each month. You can see some examples on this slide. They're very easy to track and include in your budget. So you should be prepared and ready to pay for these each month. Now, periodic expenses are predictable expenses too, but they're on a different schedule other than month to month. So you'd want to take the bill amount that you have and divide by the number of months in between each bill. So for example, if you pay $600 for car insurance every 6 months, then you'd want to budget $100 each month to pay that bill so that it's ready and available when the bill comes. And then the last expense we have is variable expenses, which are the least predictable ones because they change each month. So based on past activity, you can kind of get an estimate range or predict a little bit. So if you spent somewhere, let's say $80 to $120 over a 6-month time period on your PG&E bill, then you'll want to budget about $100 or so for this expense item. Or you can go even more conservative and just say, I'm gonna have $120 allocated because that's the high end. It's most important to keep track of this category of expenses and change your habits as needed because these things can fluctuate. These types of expenses can fluctuate.
Yeah, and these are the ones that can get out of hand if you're not really paying attention. If you are keeping your future self in mind, as well as you're taking care of your current self, then you got to look at these three expense categories and ask honestly, do I really need this expense? Now, if it isn't a need and it doesn't fall into that category of items that create meaning and bring joy, then you should consider reducing or removing, eliminating the expense. So just off the top of your head, is anyone spending money on something that doesn't fit in the definition of need or creates meaning, brings joy? And if you're willing to share, put it in the chat. Don't worry. I'm not going to force you to, commit to stop doing it. I just want to see if you can recognize that there's this stuff. Immediately, boom. Comcast. It's universal. Comcast wins. Even if it is a need or fits into one of those, meaning, joy categories, you can still find a way to save. Now, maybe you work, multiple jobs and you don't have time to cook meals every day. So you end up going out and getting takeout 5-6 days a week, right? See if you can drop that. Maybe on weekends you can cook 3 or 4 meals instead of 1 or 2, and you can drop that 5 or 6 meals out every week to 2 or 3. And that's a savings right there. Lots of expenses are negotiable. We threaten, this is the Comcast thing, we actually threaten to drop cable. This is in my house. We threaten to drop cable every 18 months and they always give us a deal for the next 12 months or 24 months. And by the end of that 24 months, we're angry we signed up for it because it's still more expensive than everything else. And then we argue again and we get a better deal. And so we keep going back to Comcast. They keep giving us that deal. You can always change banks. You can change insurance companies. You can change cell phone plans. You can almost always find a way to reduce some of the expenses that you have. You can also, and this is really important, just manage things better. This could be meaning something like, avoiding overdraft fees, or, and I see this one all the time, if you're keeping the $20,000 inheritance that your aunt gave you in your savings account, paying you 0.01%, while carrying an $8,000 credit card that you pay 17% interest on, that makes no sense in the world. And people, what's it called? Mental accounting. I can't spend this money I got from my aunt to pay off my credit card, but you save a huge amount of money in interest when you do that. So good idea to take some of that money, pay off that high interest debt. You can almost always find $100 or $200 worth of savings. And what I'm not saying is take that $100, $200 and put it towards your long-term portfolios. That's not the goal necessarily. If you find $200 of savings, you have a choice. You can then spend that $200 of savings all on things that bring meaning right now, You can spend half on things that bring meaning right now and half for the future. You can spend it, you can save it all for the future. But you can transfer stuff that you're just spending to stuff that you're spending that brings meaning and joy, or fulfills needs in the future.
I got a comment, Jonathan, and says that's a tough mental security mindset to break, spending the saving to pay down the debt.
Yep. Yep. It's so strange. I see it so often. That's sort of a proof of the point that it's like a security blanket. Having the cash is like a security blanket where you're fighting against yourself the whole way. But yeah, you're absolutely right, Michelle. It's difficult to break that.
So when you're looking for a place to rent, it's best to do so during a down season. For example, when college students are moving out, or like right now, no one's in college, at least on campuses. But nonetheless, you'll want to research the different areas and get a sense of how much an apartment will cost that you're looking for. And that's based on the number of bedrooms, the size of the apartment, and the amenities. Landlords typically look for tenants about 1 to 2 months out from when it will become vacant. So be prepared to go to showings and fill out a rent application as soon as possible. You may be able to get a competitive advantage by offering more months of rent up front and even get a lower rate. Now, if you own a home, there are some things you can do to reduce expenses as well. When mortgage rates go down like how they are now, you can refinance to a lower rate and get a lower monthly payment. If you believe your home has been previously appraised for a higher amount than it's worth, request an appraisal to reduce the property tax. Lastly, take care of small issues that come up around the house before they become larger ones that will cost you much more in the long run.
And then you got utility bills. It's another good place you can actually find savings. I get to see a lot of people's electric bill. When we do a financial plan, we look at all the details, and I'm always very surprised. So the first thing I can recommend to save some money on your utility bill is to shut the lights off. When you leave a room, turn the lights off, and so that's one thing that Kate actually she's my wife again, for those people that don't know, goes to the house basically every time there's a light on. She calls a kid who was in here last, come in here and shut this light off. Wherever they are in the house, they've got to run back to that room and shut the light off. And by kid, I mean that started with me. So everyone has to learn this lesson. You got to shut the light off. You can't leave the room without shutting the light off. And you can turn the power down. And if you turn turn the heat down so that when it's cold, you wear a sweater instead of having the heat pop on. You can reduce expenses by reducing utility bills fairly easily. Another thing you can do is you can keep your cell phone for 5 years. I'm waiting to hear people yell at me, but they can't because we're on Zoom. So that's fantastic. No one needs the latest model. I mean, maybe if you're in a really high tech industry and you require it for coding or something like that, maybe you need it. But I think the iPhone 6 is probably fine. It may update. Oh, I love it, Jerry. I love it. Someone's got an iPhone 5. That's great. We actually called, and this is the last thing here, this bundle. We actually called the phone company and said, hey, we'd like to have our landline pulled out. And they said, how about we just bundle all this stuff together and we'll save you $100 and you can keep your landline. So we still have the landline, still no one uses it, but we saved a bunch of money on everything else. So there's lots of ways you can find to save money on utilities. And then there's also ways to save money on transportation. Now, the easiest way to save money on transportation is to buy the 12-year-old used cars, not new cars. My parents did this my entire life. They drove like 25-year-old pickups. I did this until about 10 years of living in the Bay Area, and everyone buys a new car, leases a new car, and I eventually succumbed. That's another peer pressure weakness on my part. So you can also see if you can refinance your car with a lower rate, or sell your car, buy a cheaper car, and do the things you were taught, right? Maintain the car, keep the tire pressure, price compare your gas, drive defensively. These are all ways you can actually reduce the cost of car ownership. I know I don't feel good about it now, but after we have a vaccine, buy a transit pass. This is often unquestionably the cheapest way you can travel, and makes it a better world.
Yeah, I'm distracted by all the chat. I think the chat's really, really hot. So first of all, I just want to say debt is not bad as it sometimes is made out to be, especially for big purchase items like college, buying a home, or starting a business. I think it gets a bad rep when it comes to credit cards and things like that where people have been exploited. But if you're trying to reduce your loan and debt expenses, you'll want to make timely payments or even larger payments if you can afford to. You can also call creditors regularly to inquire about lower interest rates, similar to refinancing a mortgage. And you will want to avoid opening and canceling credit cards frequently because it hurts your credit score.
So someone just mentioned in chat that they buy the recently off lease. That was far and away the best car purchase I ever made, was one that was just off lease. It was like almost brand new, had already been, depreciated a lot. That was a great purchase. That's a really good idea. Thanks for putting that in chat.
So you can also reduce fees and charges that may incur, like with the bank. If you receive account fees, it can't hurt to ask the bank to waive them. Most of the time they will, because they want to keep you as a client. It's very competitive. With credit cards, make sure to pay them on time and never exceed your limit. You can also set up auto pay to avoid late fees and explore overdraft protection on your checking and savings account, or just monitor it carefully so you don't overspend.
So growing up, we'd go through, my mom and I, and sometimes my brother when he wasn't being lazy, he's my younger brother. We would go through the Sunday paper and the grocery store mailers, and we would cut out all the coupons, and then we'd go to the grocery store, and I was totally stigmatized by this, embarrassed by the practice. I didn't like sitting in line and counting out the things. I just felt really embarrassed by that when I was little. But I know, Paul, when we talked about this earlier, you said you had a couple like apps that would if you go by Safeway and there's a deal on something, it would tell you, and you could just look up the thing in Safeway and it would sort of automate the process.
Yeah, popular one's called Retail Me Not. And then I've used another one called Slick Deals for the longest time, where I'm just venturing out and looking what deals there are. And there's a whole community of people who are looking for deals, and then they rate them, and then it comes up on their page so that you can find out where you can get great deals on things. And then another popular one that I've used to actually get our espresso maker, which we still have, which I got it for like 80% off of retail. And it was a Breville, and I got it off of woot.com. So there's a lot of different resources out there that aren't the traditional clip coupons that you can use.
So while I'm doing this,
I'll put it in the chat.
That'd be great. And Sarah just popped one in there, honey, which is good for internet spending. That's great. And so for everyone else, I don't want to disparage anyone's supplements. I take my my wheatgrass, my cod liver oil, my vitamins, and my joint supplements every day. So I haven't read the research on it, and I'm not sure it does anything. I'm told it does good things, but this is one of the places where there's a lot of stuff that says that these are unnecessary. Not all of them are necessary. Maybe that's a better way to put it. Not all the supplements we take are useful in any way. And then when you look at things like your subscriptions, these are the services that everyone's talking about, the streaming services, $4 for this, $8 for that, $9.99 for this, $10 for that, $10.99 for this, delivery this every month. If those are really not necessary, they add up a lot, right? So know what you're spending, actually review those statements so hit your credit card, and it reminds you every month if you look at your statements. And sometimes, if it's necessary, you can actually reach out to the company and say, can I get $1 off a month if I pay you 12 months in advance? So that's a really good way to actually save some money there as well.
And Jonathan, did you mention that you sometimes, I don't know if you use the word threaten, but like with certain companies, you can say, hey, I'm considering other places, and they'll say, oh, we'll drop your rate.
Yeah, sure. I think threaten's a good, they're all competing. They're all competing for your business. And you can easily just say, hey, I'm thinking about going someplace else. And they might reduce some part of it.
If you're willing to put in the work, but it does take time and work.
Right. So if things are tight, ask for the break, right? Don't be shy about this. I was always, this is one of those things in my own head from when I was raised that I hate it. But if it's necessary, it's necessary. So ask for a break. My mom would ask the person give me a haircut if she'd give us a 15%, 20% discount. And that I was like, ugh, she asked for a discount at used bookstore, and, closeout racks and things like that. So I'm curious if anyone else has had that same kind of experience, been embarrassed by the practice of saving money. I think it's ridiculous in hindsight, but I know it happened to me. I don't think I'm probably alone. So I'm just curious if anyone else has had that experience. Paul, is that yep on that experience?
I was responding to Sarah.
All right. So no. I'm still alone. Thank you.
No. So I was distracted actually. So can you repeat the question one more time?
I just wanted to know if anyone else had that sense of embarrassment at trying to save money, at the strict trying to save money. And evidently I'm alone. No one else is admitting it.
Yeah. Well, it's drilled into me to save, so I never had embarrassment. It was like, if you don't save, then shame on you. So I had a different experience.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, that's it. Catherine, that's it exactly. I always wanted to have nicer things, and that's it exactly. Now, obviously, I survived, and looking back, I have an enormous amount of gratitude for the lessons and for the sacrifices that they made to stretch every penny, because I know that's really hard to do. And that's really all we're talking about here, right? We have limited resources and we have a lifetime of needs, and we want to balance our present and our future. We want to enable ourselves to meet the needs, and we want to support access to those things that make life meaningful and bring us joy. So with that, I think we've done it.
I was going to say one last thing. In regards to this, what I'm hearing on the chat is it's this pressure societally to project out this higher class image, right? And if we can just say, who gives a shit? Excuse my language. You know, that's when you can really live to your values, right?
Yeah, don't participate in the stupid games. Participate in the good games, not the stupid games.
What's important to you? Yeah.
So we finished. We had some questions throughout, and we're happy to answer more questions. There you go, John. Yeah, you can't just pop that. You can't just pop the quote in there. You got to actually explain.
Yeah, you got to say it. Yeah.
So that's a term I'd never heard of before until I had a review with clients that are in their early 40s today. And she was saying, well, we either raise the bridge or lower the water. And what does that mean? Well, you either increase your income or decrease your expenses, raise the bridge or lower the water. And if you do both, you're going to the Hall of Fame.
That's a good one. Yep. Thanks. So I know that people have things to do at 6 o'clock. So I want to make sure that if you need to jump off, jump off. There is a workbook. Sarah, is it possible, just in case, to pop that and share that here in case someone didn't get it in their email, or someone came and we didn't know they were coming, or what have you? So there's a workbook. We're not really going over the workbook here. It's just something for you guys to take home as maybe you're taking notes on it if you received it earlier. If you RSVP, we do send the workbook out before this session. And if I thought about it, I would have had Sarah post it up there at the beginning. I didn't think about it. My apologies. We are going to send tomorrow. We're going to send out a survey, and it's a simple survey. And again, we are turning these into a digital course, and we'd love to get your feedback on, the presentation, on stuff that we covered that was unnecessary, stuff that we went too deep into, stuff that you would wish that we would have covered, because we really want to make this more broadly available, and we want to do a better job. So thanks, everybody. Have a fantastic night.